The morning I found my wedding photo face down in a cardboard box in the garage, I knew the war had already started. I just hadn't been told. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I am 71 years old. I built my house with my own hands, not metaphorically, not as some sentimental exaggeration people toss around at dinner parties. I mean, I drove the nails. I poured the concrete for the back patio. I painted every room twice because the first coat never looks right, and my late wife, Carol, taught me that a thing worth doing is worth doing until it's done properly. We raised 2 sons in that house. We buried a dog in the backyard under the oak tree. We celebrated 38 Christmases in the living room with the crooked fireplace mantle that I always meant to fix and never did, because Carol said she loved it crooked. She said it had character. She said it was like me. Carol died 4 years ago. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind that doesn't negotiate. She was gone in 11 months from diagnosis to the last breath I held her through. And when she left, she took a version of me with her, the version that was easy, that laughed without thinking, that slept through the night. But she left me the house. Our house. The one with the crooked mantle and the oak tree and 38 years of fingerprints on the doorframes. My son Marcus moved back in 8 months after Carol died. He called it temporary. He said he and his wife Brianna were between places, a phrase that I've come to understand means something different to every generation. To mine, it meant you'd hit hard times and family steps up. To Marcus's generation, I've learned, it can sometimes mean you found a better arrangement and you're waiting for the current occupant to realize it. Brianna was polite in the beginning, carefully, deliberately polite, the kind of polite that takes effort, that you can see the machinery of behind the eyes. She complimented my cooking exactly once, and after that she began suggesting they order in more often. She said it was because she didn't want me to exhaust myself. I was 71, not dead. I had been cooking for 50 years. But I let it go because Marcus looked happy, and Marcus looking happy had become something I held onto since Carol left. The first real sign was small. I came downstairs one Saturday morning, and the photograph that had lived on the hallway table since 1987, Carol and me at Niagara Falls, her in that ridiculous yellow raincoat, both of us soaking wet and laughing like idiots, was gone. In its place was a succulent in a geometric concrete pot. I asked Marcus about it. He looked uncomfortable in that particular way he'd perfected since Brianna arrived, a kind of full-body wince, like a man preparing to be caught between 2 forces he didn't know how to navigate. He said Brianna was refreshing the space. He said she had a good eye for design. He said Carol would have wanted the house to feel alive. I didn't say what I was thinking. I went to the garage later and found the photo in a box labeled Daniel's Miscellaneous, along with 3 other framed pictures of Carol, a decorative plate her mother had given us as a wedding gift, and a hand-stitched throw pillow that read "Home is where the heart is," that our youngest son Robbie had made for Carol in the 4th grade. I sat in the garage for a long time, long enough for the light to change, long enough to understand that what was happening wasn't decoration, it was displacement. Over the next 3 months, I watched Brianna systematically edit Carol out of every room. The living room curtains, burgundy velvet, that Carol had special ordered from a catalogue in 1999 and been irrationally proud of, were replaced with linen shears that let in a cold, flat light. The kitchen was reorganized so that I couldn't find anything, and when I asked where the good mixing bowls had gone, Brianna explained cheerfully that she'd streamlined the cabinets and donated items that were redundant. Those bowls had been a gift. I'd used them to teach Marcus how to bake bread when he was 9 years old. The guest room, which had been Carol's sewing room, still holding her machine, her fabric bins, her half-finished projects, was converted into what Brianna called a wellness space. Yoga mat, diffuser, string lights. Carol's sewing machine was in the garage. I found it when I went looking for a screwdriver one afternoon, pushed up against the wall under tarp, like something being hidden from a landlord. And then came the living room couch. Carol and I had bought that couch in 1994 from a furniture store that no longer exists. It was deep green, overstuffed, the kind of couch that held you rather than simply supported you. We'd watched 1,000 movies on that couch. We'd slept on it during thunderstorms because Carol loved rain and didn't want to be a floor above it. I'd held her on that couch during the hard months, when the treatments made her too tired to do anything but breathe and squeeze my hand. One afternoon I came home from my Thursday card game with the men from my old job to find it gone. A sleek grey sectional sat in its place, angular and cold, and precisely the kind of furniture that looks better in a photograph than it does under human body. I asked Marcus where the couch was. He said they'd donated it. He said it was old. He said the new one was better for his back. I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed, Carol's side, which I still don't sleep on, and I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a dramatic one. A quiet, certain, irrevocable one, the kind that settles into your bones the way cold does when you've been outside too long. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name is Gerald Hofstede, and he's been handling my affairs for 22 years. I told him what had been happening. I told him about the photographs, the couch, the sewing machine under the tarp. I told him I wanted to understand my options. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I pay him for. Then he asked me a question that I hadn't thought to ask myself. Daniel, is your name the only name on the deed? It was. It had always been. Carol and I had kept the deed in my name alone for estate planning purposes, a recommendation from our financial advisor when Marcus and Robbie were young. It had seemed like a formality then, a piece of paper in a filing cabinet, a technicality. It was, as it turned out, everything. Gerald explained my rights to me carefully, because that's what good lawyers do. They don't assume you know, and they don't make you feel foolish for not knowing. He explained that as the sole owner of the property, I had the right to determine who resided in it. He explained that Marcus and Brianna, having no formal lease agreement, no written arrangement, no legal tenancy documentation of any kind, were guests at my discretion. Guests who could be asked to leave. I thanked Gerald and told him I'd be in touch. Then I did something that might surprise people. I waited 2 more weeks. I waited because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to give the situation every possible chance to correct itself without what was coming. I watched. I paid attention. I looked for signs that I was misreading things, that Brianna was misguided rather than deliberate, that Marcus would find his footing and become the man I raised rather than the man she was shaping. On the 14th day of waiting, I came downstairs for breakfast and found that the crooked fireplace mantel had been straightened. Carol's crooked mantel, the one she loved, the one that was like me, she'd said. Someone had hired a handyman. I found the receipt on the kitchen counter, not hidden, not thought necessary to hide, and had the mantel leveled, remounted, made symmetrical and correct and completely, utterly stripped of everything that had made it ours. I ate my breakfast standing up, looking at that straight mantel, and I thought about Carol saying it as character. I thought about 38 years of Christmases. I thought about the wedding photo in the cardboard box, and the sewing machine under the tarp, and the green couch that held us through the hard months. Then I went upstairs, called Gerald, and said 3 words, "Let's do it." Gerald drafted a formal notice of termination of residency. Not a harsh letter, not a cruel one. Gerald doesn't do cruel, and neither do I, but a clear one. A legal one. A document that stated, in language that admitted no ambiguity, that Daniel Robert Mercer, sole owner of the property at 412 Wisteria Lane, was formally requesting that Marcus Allen Mercer and Brianna Lee Mercer vacate the premises within 30 days. I left it on the kitchen table one morning before they woke up. I made myself a cup of coffee, took it to the back patio, sat in my chair under the oak tree where our dog is buried, and I waited. I heard Brianna find it first. I know because of the silence that preceded the noise, a long-held moment, like the breath before a storm breaks, and then the sound of her voice saying Marcus's name in a register I hadn't heard before, sharp, stripped of its usual careful performance. Marcus came outside to find me. He was wearing the expression I remembered from when he was 8 years old, and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball, that complicated mix of guilt and defensiveness that children wear when they know they've done wrong, but aren't ready to say so. He sat down across from me. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "You can raid, you know what it is." He said it wasn't necessary. He said we could talk about it. He said Brianna was just trying to make the house feel like a home. I let him finish, then I asked him one question, whose home? He didn't have an answer for that. Or he had one, but he was smart enough to know not to say it out loud. I told him then calmly, looking at the oak tree rather than at his face, because sometimes that's easier, what I had found in those 2 cardboard boxes in the garage. I described every item, the wedding photo, his grandmother's plate, Robbie's 4th grade pillow, his mother's sewing machine under tarp. I told him about the green couch and what his mother and I had shared on it. I told him about the mantel, and what his mother had said about it, and what it had felt like to come downstairs and find it corrected, as if 38 years of beautiful imperfection had been a mistake requiring fixing. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I watched his face do complicated things. I watched him remember who he was before he forgot. Finally he said, "I didn't know about all of that." I believed him. That was the saddest part. I genuinely believed him. Brianna had been careful, strategic, incremental. A photo here, a couch there, change the curtains, reorganize the kitchen, straighten the mantel. None of it dramatic enough in isolation to trigger an alarm. All of it together, a systematic erasure of Carol Mercer from the house she had loved for 4 decades. "I know you didn't," I said, "but you live here, you should have." He didn't fight the notice after that. I think some part of him was relieved not to be leaving. but to have been shown clearly what had been happening in a language he couldn't minimize or explain away. Brianna tried. She called me that evening, her voice cycling through registers I catalogued with something like clinical detachment, wounded, then reasonable, then wounded again. She said I was being reactive. She said she'd only been trying to modernize. She said, with a precision that told me it had been prepared, that Carol would have wanted the house to evolve. I told her I'd known Carol Mercer for 44 years, and I was confident in my understanding of what she would and would not have wanted. Then I wished her well and ended the call. They left on a Tuesday, 26 days after the notice. Marcus hugged me at the door, a real hug, long enough to mean something, and said he was sorry. He said it quietly, the way people say things they actually mean, without ornamentation or performance. I told him I loved him and that nothing between us was broken, only between him and his choices. He nodded. He understood. Brianna carried boxes to the moving truck without looking at me. When they were gone, I walked through my house alone. It had been redecorated almost beyond recognition. The linen shears hung in the living room. The grey sectional occupied the space where the green cooch had lived. The succulent sat on the hallway table. The mantel was straight. The kitchen was streamlined and foreign. But the walls were still mine. The floors were still mine. The oak tree in the backyard was still mine, and so was everything beneath it. I started that same afternoon. I went to the garage and I opened the cardboard boxes labeled Daniel's Miscellaneous, and I carried every single item back into the house. I put the Niagara Falls photograph back on the hallway table where it had lived since 1987, Carol in her yellow raincoat, the both of us drenched and laughing. I found a hammer, and I found one of Robbie's 4th grade pillow, and I put it on the armchair in the corner. I hung the wedding plate in the kitchen where it belonged. My youngest son Robbie flew in the following weekend. I'd called him when things were still unfolding, because Robbie is the one who calls back within the hour and doesn't ask questions before he asks how you are. He helped me move Carol's sewing machine back upstairs. We set it up in the room that had been her sewing room, and then briefly someone's wellness space, and we put her fabric bins back along the wall and her half-finished projects back in their baskets, and when we were done, Robbie stood in the doorway and said it looked right. "It looks like Mom," he said. That's exactly what it looked like. Over the next month, I took back my house piece by piece. I found the burgundy curtains. Miraculously, Brianna had stored them in a bin rather than donating them, perhaps intending to deal with them later, and I hung them back in the living room. The cold, flat light was replaced by the warm, slightly dramatic glow that Carol had loved. The cooch I couldn't get back. It was gone. But I found one at an estate sale 3 weeks later, deep blue, overstuffed, the kind that holds you, and I put it in the same spot, facing the fireplace. The fireplace mantel took the most effort. I called a carpenter, a man named Roy who'd done work for me years ago, and I explained what I wanted. I showed him a photograph of the original, with its slight leftward lane, its imperfect angle, its character. Roy looked at the photo for a long time and then looked at the corrected mantel and shook his head slowly, the way craftsmen do when they see something made worse in the name of improvement. It took him an afternoon. When he was done, the mantel leaned again, slightly, beautifully, exactly as it had for decades. I stood in front of it for a long time. I thought about Carol telling me it was like me. I thought about what she meant, not broken, not wrong, just shaped by living, made distinct by years and use, and the particular angles of an imperfect, wonderful life. I thought about how easy it is to mistake character for flaw, to see the things that make something real as problems to be corrected rather than truths to be honored. I put a photograph on the mantel. Carol and me, our wedding day, 1978. She's looking at the camera and I'm looking at her, which tells you everything you need to know about our 44 years. Marcus called me 2 months after he and Brianna moved out. He called on a Sunday morning, which is when we've always talked, a habit from his college years that neither of us ever officially established, but neither of us ever broke. He sounded like himself, like the Marcus who used to make bread with me in the kitchen with those bowls, who used to sit under the oak tree and ask me questions about everything. He said things weren't perfect between him and Brianna, that there were conversations they were having, that some things had become clear to him. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my marriage to dissect. I told him the door was always open. I told him I meant that in the specific, literal sense, that if he needed to come home, there was a home to come to. His old room was his old room. The oak tree was still there. The mantel still leaned the way it always had. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That's good, Dad, that's really good." Robbie came back at Christmas with his family, his wife Alina and their 2 kids, who are 7 and 4 and who ran through the house like water finding its level, touching everything, delighted by everything, asking about the photograph on the mantel in the way children ask about things that interest them, which is directly and without performance. My 7-year-old granddaughter, Lily, pointed at the wedding photo and said, "Who's that?" "That's your grandmother," I said, "Carol." "She's pretty," Lily said. "She was the best person I ever knew," I said. Lily considered this with the serious, unfiltered attention children give to things they find genuinely interesting. Then she said, "Is that why you have her picture on the fireplace?" "That's exactly why," I said. She seemed satisfied with this. She went back to her brother, and they resumed their investigation of the house, and I stood in my living room with the burgundy curtains and the overstuffed couch and the crooked mantle and the wedding photo and the sound of my grandchildren running above me, and I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would say if she could see all of it, the boxes in the garage, the straightened mantle, the strategic erasure, and the methodical restoration. I thought about what she would say about what I'd done. I think she would say that I waited long enough. I think she would say that I was calm about it, which she always valued more than she valued drama. I think she might say that the house feels right again, like itself, like us, like the sum of everything we built together over 44 years and 38 Christmases, and one crooked mantle that nobody ever needed to fix. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 71 years old and I live in my house. Carol's photograph is on the mantle. The mantle still leans, and if anyone ever touches it again, they will find that I have not lost a single thing that I am not willing to take back. Some men are easy to erase. I am not one of them,